evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is to be a direct continuation of our previous seminar session, still on the subject of the psychology of reason and emotions and the relationship between them. You'll remember that last time there were some questions some of you had there was not time to answer, so we'll continue right on with our exploration tonight. Let's begin now with the first question.
Mr. Branden, can one be motivated to act in the absence of any emotions?
Here we have to distinguish what is meant because there's more than one angle to what I think you're asking. To begin with, we are always having some emotions. Speaking literally, it's not correct to talk of acting in the absence of any emotion because I don't think a person can be in the state where he's conscious and functioning at all, but not experiencing any emotion in the literal sense. Therefore, what I take your question to mean is, can one act in the absence of any emotional impulse to perform the act one is going to take, any emotional support, any desire? Can one act by sheer mental decision in the absence of anything like emotional desire or inclination? And if that is what is meant, then I think the answer very clearly is yes. There are times in all of our lives when we are obliged to take actions and do things which may be necessary, but which just at that time we don't have any will in the emotional sense to do, perhaps through sadness or depression or being caught up in some emergency situation where one has to act against an impulse to flee or to escape, and yet one has to keep one's head and act quite differently than one's emotions might be pulling one to do. So there are many situations of that kind where we are obliged to act and have to have the ability to act without any help from our emotions in the ordinary meaning of the word. And to develop this point a little bit further, this is especially relevant when a person is trying to work his way through psychological problems. Because a person may across his lifetime have formed or acquired certain mistaken or inappropriate or harmful and self-destructive attitudes, premises, and values, such that he will have mistaken, harmful, self-destructive emotions. Emotions pulling him in a direction which is definitely inimical to his own objective interests and welfare. Now suppose he reaches the point in his life or development where he comes to realize this, yet the underlying psychological problems are not yet solved. He might have to put a stop to certain types of destructive behavior and begin to reorganize his life and change his behavior and redirect his actions in ways which will be experienced by him as very strange, very unfamiliar, and perhaps in certain respects very difficult, because he has not yet solved all the underlying psychological problems that generated the inappropriate responses in the first place. And yet he cannot go on taking those former actions which were bad for him and which were worsening whatever his problem was. And very often in therapy, this is a point which I have to emphasize. For example, suppose, take a very simple example. A man is socially shy or fearful, and he is lonely, doesn't have any friendships, doesn't date, wants to get started, and perhaps he has to overcome a good deal of fear to get himself started. And he may want to tell himself, well, I'll wait until it's very easy, when all my psychological problems are solved, and then I'll become more socially assertive and aggressive. But the truth is he'll never reach that day if he waits for his emotions to come along cheering him on. he has to first initiate the action when his emotions won't be there to support him at all, and in fact may only be feeding him fear, because this is still a strange and unfamiliar territory to him, you see. So, interpreting the question on a common sense level, I would say that there are many situations where we have to act against our emotions, or when we are simply feeling blank, nothing, emotionally empty, emotionally exhausted, and yet our mind appreciates the fact that some action is required, and we have to act by sheer mental decision. Now, I could end my answer here, but in the interest of completeness, I'd like to add one additional thought. There is a deeper level in which it might be argued, and argued validly, that even in situations where it seems to a person that he is functioning by sheer intellectual conviction or willpower, where his emotions are either actively pulling him the other way or evidently absent, so there's only a void in place of his emotions. Even there, it could be argued that there is a deeper level upon which another kind of emotion is being mobilized to assist him in performing the action. What kind of emotion might that be on the deeper level? Well, it might be his desire to do what is right or rational. It might be his ambition to be moral. It might be an emotion pertaining to his self-respect or his self-esteem. It might be an emotional sense of respect for reality and the desire to be in accord with reality. So on that deeper sense, there can be a kind of emotional involvement which is not ordinarily recognized as being an emotion, you see. And at such times, it generally doesn't feel like there are any emotions cheering you on or making the job of action any easier. But perhaps in that somewhat more technical interpretation, it could be argued that even there is a kind of emotional impetus behind one's actions, though not what people usually mean when they talk about emotions driving their actions or emotions being behind their actions.
Mr. Branden, why does any display of strong emotion upset or scare some people?
Well, that can occur for several reasons. To begin with, some people, when they were growing up, perhaps saw a great deal of hysterical, blind emotionality and irrationality in the behavior of their parents, and mistakenly concluded that any strong emotion means being out of control rationally and intellectually, means doing hateful or cruel or barbaric things, means being destructive, and so forth. So some children evidently were so traumatized by the emotional violence and unthinking cruelty which they saw on the part of their parents that they form this association and thereafter tend to perceive the display of strong emotions as potentially dangerous or threatening. But that's only one possibility. Incidentally, these possibilities that I'm going to list are not mutually exclusive. One person might be motivated by several of these considerations interwoven. A person might himself be very susceptible to acting on emotions just because he feels them. And so his only way of asserting what he believes is rational control is to repress his emotions or to deny their reality, because he feels that if he lets himself know what he feels, his emotions will sweep him overboard. And that kind of person tends to be afraid of the appearance of emotions in anyone,